Hey guys, welcome to Rebuilding the Beast. I'm your host, Bessa Zazili, NBA player turned podcast host. And on this show, I'm going to have a lot of my inspiring friends come on to share with you their rebuilding journeys. I hope you can take the tips from their lives and apply it to your life as well. Oh, and don't forget to hit subscribe, like, comment, share with a friend. All the things. All right, I'll see you guys soon. Man, you know what? Guys, today we have a CEO boss lady. Man, my Nigerian sister, she is in the healthcare space, but from an entrepreneurish, from a tech standpoint, right? So you get to explain all that, what telehealth is. Telehealth, is that how you say it?
Yes, telehealth.
And I'm really inspired because I wanted to have a different variety of guests this new season, right? So right now, this is August 21st, I want to say. 22nd? 21st. 21st. And this podcast is going to be released later. But I wanted to have a new set of guests this new season of people that can inspire people, a different audience of mine. And ever since I heard your story, I've been so inspired. My Nigerian sister, Crystal Adesanya. Formerly Crystal
Evolocha, Igbo.
Yes,
Imo
yes.
State.
I think you might need to bring the mic closer.
Oh, okay. So you hear me? Okay, cool. Cool.
Yeah, we want to hear you. It's not even about me no more. So I'm gonna set it up and I'm gonna get out your way. Okay. All right. So in 2021, you were Forbes 30 under 30.
Yes.
Right. So maybe let's talk about that. How that comes to be, what that means, and just being a kind of like a face and inspiration for young women out there.
Awesome. So I guess to talk specifically about the Forbes piece, so my husband, Adesanya, is actually on the list. He was on the list in 2009, I believe. And
Power couple.
And he's my biggest inspiration, actually.
That's awesome.
We met when we were in college, and he was a senior and I was a freshman, and we didn't quite really talk until post-graduation.
Why, y'all were shy? What's the deal?
Because he was like a big brother, mentor figure type thing.
Big brother, mentor turned lover. Maybe let's talk about this. Okay, sorry, no, I'm interrupting. Keep going. Sorry.
So essentially, and he's also a healthcare entrepreneur, founder of a company called Moving Analytics. And what they do is cardiac rehab, which is at-home care for folks who had a cardiac arrest or like post-cardiac just recovery, so to speak. Instead of going into a health center, they do it at home. So they are paired with like nurses, coaches, et cetera, et cetera. So him and his co-founder have been running the company for a few years. And when I first moved to LA, I was working in the real estate investment space as an analyst. So I was doing that and I loved it. And I loved talking to investors, building relationships. That's my jam. That's my thing. And, for me, I always wanted to go into healthcare. But a lot of times, and kind of going to like your roots, your background, right? When I think about healthcare, you always think about being a doctor, right? So I thought the only way to go into healthcare was to be, an MD, basically. But watching my husband and his team and their experiences, they are engineers who started a healthcare company and made it super successful and did a lot of great work and continue to do so. So for me, the main reason why I started my company was because I had a crazy kind of life-threatening health issue when I was in college. And I always wanted to do something in that space, but back to like not knowing how or what to do. So essentially, when I eventually left real estate and went into healthcare, started to ask a bunch of questions, of course, learning from them and learning from everybody else. But then that kind of spiraled into this whole thing. And I can talk about a little bit more of that. But, when it came the year 2020 during COVID, I went into telemedicine, right? And I've been running my company since 2018 in December. So it's been a while. So 2018 December, but in 2019 developed a product and everything else and launched it with a partner who's actually a doctor. So that's something else to keep in mind. I had to find a medical professional to partner with to create this product. because, wanted to do something in the women's health space. So I teamed up with an OBGYN.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I want to hear,
Mm-hmm.
because this is the reason why
Yes.
I think that your story is so powerful. You had a health scare,
Yes.
and you get to see the inefficiencies in, when you're dealing with healthcare at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So you're dealing with those inefficiencies, especially as an immigrant
Mm-hmm.
coming to America.
Yes.
I am one as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so who gets to tell you how to deal with the healthcare system at that point? How do you learn? And then, like, what happened? What happened to you?
Yeah, no one.
Yeah.
Short answer. I think that's an important piece of this, right? Thinking through that experience as an immigrant, as a young person who's in college, away from home for the first time. A lot of times, sexually active for the first time, independently seeking care, that sort of stuff, and also
So you
trying.
left your house. Now you went, I'm telling you, Momo.
So that's even the thing, right? Where you're like, you're not even trying to talk to your parents or anyone about anything, because the reason why you went to school was for an education, which we're all doing and pretty successful at, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you're juggling culture shock of coming to a different country with like life changes as a young person, and on top of trying to stay on top of your grades and everything else. So in that time, I remember and I tell the story a lot. I had, abdominal pain, and I didn't want to go talk about it. I was uncomfortable with what all was going, because a lot of things were happening at the same time. And I remember going to the health center once, and they didn't have a spot, or I think they were like booked or something. You know how it gets really busy on campus.
Yeah.
And I just was like, you know what? I don't want to talk about it anyway. I'm just going to go figure it out. And I self-medicated, and I ended up passing out and being rushed to the hospital for emergency surgery on something that was very different from what I thought it was. I thought it was period cramps, basically.
What's self-medicating?
So essentially, I went to CVS and got medication over the counter and took it without talking to a doctor.
But how do you know what was wrong?
I thought I had period cramps or something like that.
You went to Google.
Right? So I Googled my
to
symptoms.
figure it
So
out.
Dr. Google is not your friend. So,
No.
the whole idea for me even starting a company was, how do you move away from Google, right? Creating some paradigm shift from Googling all your symptoms to actually talking to doctors. And that's the first product. And it was a simple product. It was just like a Ask a Doctor app that I developed, that people could text doctors and ask questions. Basically, that's how it started. So yeah.
I've never Googled something that is an ailment where I don't feel like I'm about to die.
Yep.
It could be like, I have a headache, and I
Yep.
Google it. It's like, well, your brain is about to explode.
Yep.
Something always crazy.
Yep.
And so then you go in and you get rushed in for surgery.
Mm-hmm.
You open sharing what happened, what it actually was?
What it actually was. So essentially, it was a combination of things. It was some liver damage that I had. Yeah. So at that point, it was, an infection that ended up developing into something totally different.
Wow.
So it was a combination of things. Now, thinking back, you know how people have like UTIs and things like that, and if you don't take care of it, you can have advanced issues. I just think back to, like, if I had spoken to someone earlier, then something like that wouldn't have happened or wouldn't have been escalated. So that was the main reason why I said, you know what, I'm just going to talk to people and find out if people have similar issues to what I had. And I heard the same things from like young people, like, yeah, like I didn't want to go, whatever happened, or even horror stories that were worse than that. And then I was like, you know what, we got to do something about it. We have to, one, leverage technology to fix the problem, but also create a safe space. Because the big thing that I didn't find, although my school was super diverse, we didn't have diversity in the types of clinicians and doctors on campus. So imagine coming from a different country. Number one, you're learning a different way of interacting and language and everything else. And then you don't find anyone who's Black, for example, or who looks like you, who you can actually share your experience with, if that makes sense. So that was the whole purpose, like safe space one, technology one, but also that, multicultural, clinician based, and making sure students have representation in their healthcare. So
that is amazing.
Yeah.
So you come to the United States.
Yes.
From Nigeria, same as me. Is there any way you could have imagined that you would now be a CEO of a company? Because I only asked that question because when I came here and I was crossing that water, I only had three options of what I could be. It was doctor, lawyer, engineer. Everything else, I was going to be a failure. So right now, I'm a failure. All right, that's what I'm trying to say.
Very successful failure. Yeah.
So that's my question: is like you now as an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Could you have seen this when you were crossing the water?
So it's a couple of things. I've always been an entrepreneur, and I think we're entrepreneurial in nature, just being Nigerian, right? And for me, like I grew up in a household where my dad was an entrepreneur, my mom was in politics. They were both extremely busy. They were both doing their own things individually, successfully, and I never quite saw my dad go to an office, right?
Really?
Yes. So he would, he had an estate and he had like an office there, but he always stayed home or traveled. So I never understood the whole 9 to 5 type of thing that a lot of my peers will talk about. You see what I'm saying? So growing up, it was kind of like, and we talk about this, like what you see is what you become sort of thing. So for me, it was, I don't remember my dad ever pushing me to do any of the things that you mentioned, but I know society would push you to do any of those things,
right,
if that makes sense. And for me, the only people that I also saw who were successful were the doctors and the lawyers and the engineers. So for you kind of like created in your mind, you have to be one of those things, right? So I wanted to be a lawyer. So that's actually part of it. Like I studied econ. I was trying to go to law school. That did not work out.
You were econ too? I was an econ major as well. But I switched from pre-med. That was a whole conversation with my family. They were like, man, you're throwing your life away. I'm like, economics major. Are you kidding me?
So yes, right? So I was an econ major going to law school, basically, right? Because I couldn't study anything else because, yes, it would be considered like, what would you do with that? Like when you graduate, what do you do? And when I was in college, the interesting thing was because I had come to the U.S. as an international student, the options were very limited, right? When it comes to like work and things like that, like, and I heard my friends like tell me about work study and all these things. And I was like, that is nice. It must be nice to work and get your tuition paid.
Yeah.
Right? Or something. But, we couldn't get jobs. It was only on campus jobs. And those jobs were always taken by everyone else, super competitive jobs. And
you can't get Pell Grants.
Right. You can't get any of those things, right? Your parents are paying all cash for the most part.
And more fees.
And more fees. Remember paying like 4 times more what everyone else was paying. It's kind of like, out-of-state tuition on steroids, basically, right? So essentially, I started doing hair and all these things. And throughout college, I was doing like hair throughout college. And I started my first company while I was in college. So I started a company called Crystal. It was a menswear brand. So we made like ties, bow ties, lapel pins, that sort of stuff. I started sewing at home because I just love to do stuff with my hands.
Wow.
And then I went into manufacturing of that and started really selling, and it became its own brand, so to speak. So when I left college, I did that for a while working in real estate as an analyst. And then post that, I was like, you know what? I'm just going to combine all these things and work towards my actual purpose, which I knew was in healthcare. So that's kind of how that evolved, if that makes sense. So
how do you go about figuring out what your purpose is?
I think it's a couple of things, right? I don't think it's something you just wake up and know. I think it's about repetition and finding what you love, right? If you're doing one thing every day and you're like, this is actually making me happy, this is actually giving me joy, and this is actually helping other people, right? Because it's one thing to do things that make you feel great versus doing things that make you feel great while other people feel great, right? So I think that was it. And the drive, like I remember for a long time, and this happens to entrepreneurs all the time, right? You have an idea in your mind and it's just sitting there, and it's not going to go away or move or shake until you actually put it out in the world. So I think that's how I found my purpose. One, like, of course, through a personal health incident that led me to starting Kiira Health and what it's become today, but also knowing that every day I'm excited to go to work, right? I used to I loved my job in the past, but this is just
Different.
something very different, right? I remember leaving my job I was happy at, right? Didn't have problems there. It was a pretty great job. In fact, one of my bosses from that job is now my COO at my
Wow.
company
Oh, you
now.
started poaching people? Oh my gosh.
I did not poach her.
They're
She
like,
had
wow,
transitioned
whatever.
already.
I see your face and I see how happy you are. Whatever you're doing, I want some of that. All right? Please hire me.
'Cause, she was a phenomenal person and a
Yeah.
great leader and someone who really pushed me when I first started the company. So it's the thing of like, even when you're hiring folks for your company, it's like hire people who you don't mind working for one day, basically. Right?
Wow.
And that's the important thing. And everyone within my space, I consider a leader in their own right. And, encouraging people to step up to the plate because that's what she did with me, right? It's kind of like, you can do it, you can get this done, you can XYZ. And then I was just like, I'm the best at this. I'm good. And when I left, she was the first person that came to mind when it came to like running the business operations and doing things that because as a CEO, you do everything, right? But then you have to find the right people that can allow you to function in your maximum capacity, right? Because your time becomes so expensive at this point. So for me, I always say like my ex-boss is now my partner and COO because she's someone I really respect and trust. So yeah, that's.
Is delegation hard? Is that something that you had to learn as you started this company?
I think yes,
Mhm.
because when you're running a startup, especially when you're running a startup from scratch, you become really scrappy and you learn everything. So I went from knowing how to run a small business, right, to running like a corporation, right? And that comes with its own ebbs and flows and emotions and everything in between. And I think, when I first started, I was doing, you have to do your decks and this and that, you have to pitch. And I spent a lot of time doing pitch competitions,
Yeah, didn't
actually.
you win? You won a pitch. I don't know
I
if you
won
won several, but
several.
several pitch competitions.
Yeah,
Okay. We're going to need some advice later on that, but yeah, finish your train of
right.
thought.
So, you have to do all those things. And then when you have to figure out how do I make, money in the beginning because I'm not quite selling anything. So I can't get revenue, but I need money to run this business in the beginning, right? So for me, I did that. And then I was like, oh, I don't have money to pay a designer. So I'm going to learn how to design. And I learned how to design. Like, oh, I don't have money to do this. And I actually enrolled in a boot camp for coding and I dropped out.
Wow. You're like,
I was
I
like,
gotta, somebody else gotta do
this
this.
is not
This
for
is too
me.
much.
I'm going to be a designer. So I went into UX design and I enjoyed it actually. And I really, really liked that piece because like, when you're an entrepreneur, you have like a bright marketing, sales mind and everything. And everything kind of like makes sense when you see it physically. So for me, I was always like, this is how my deck's gonna look. This is what my logo's gonna be like. This is what our brand is. Like you become so like filled with like ideas that you just want to put out there. But for me, I was like, you know what? Let me figure out the money piece and let me figure out the branding piece, and then I'm gonna be successful enough to where I can hire a whole engineering team and hire doctors and everything in between.
So is there like, so you have to have patience, right?
Mhm.
Because I have a vision. Like even starting this podcast, I started off just like, I started it in my apartment in Germany.
Right.
Yeah, I remember wanting to start it, but I was like, no, I got to make sure it's perfect. I got to get the perfect studio. I got to get the perfect this and that. And I had a friend that was like, yo, let's just start a podcast.
Right.
And if it's the shittiest podcast, then let it be the shittiest podcast. But like, what is the why? The why was I wanted to get these beautiful stories to inspire other people who are going through the same things. And the idea was to use your life as a masterclass. So, so we started doing the podcast and I would edit it in my apartment. I would figure out all these different things. And then eventually I got a job and then that was starting to fund the podcast. So now I can start doing stuff in the studio like we are in today. So for you, were you able, or did it make sense for you to get a job to fund your vision, or were you all just option A and I will figure out a way to get it done? I don't need anything else to help me do this.
Yeah, that's a great question.
I know the answer to this, but I'm asking, I'm trying to set it up for you.
That's a great question because it's a couple of things, right? So in order to fully launch into entrepreneurship, you got to be ready, right? And what ready means is you have to choose that, right? And it's very difficult for a lot of people to, especially if you've had a 9 to 5, it's difficult for you to leave a 9 to 5 that is
Safety, man.
safe and, predictable and everything else, predictability from your paycheck standpoint, to going to where like your next month's rent depends on what you do, right? Versus how you show up to work every day. It's one of the scariest things, right? Like, and then you're in charge of your own time and you're in charge of a bunch of different things. So for me, I was really scared. I didn't want to, officially do it. I remember also, same thing, because like I said, my husband is my inspiration. I remember.
Shout out to Ade.
I remember talking to him. This is when we were dating. I talked to him about, transitioning into entrepreneurship and like how I felt like I was called to do that instead, because I had been rocking all the jobs I had been at. I had been like doing the work, right? And then he was like, have you seen how much you've grown in such a short time? And then he said, if you take the same amount of energy, effort, and everything that you've done and you pour it into your venture, you would be amazed at what you're going to accomplish. That was what he said to me. And, I was like, I want to go to law school too. And blah, blah, blah. And he was like, you're going to spend so much money in law school. When you graduate, you're going to struggle to make partner one day. And that's a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of effort, a lot of things. And the fair thing he said is there are a lot of successful lawyers, and that's their calling. Like, you need to love it. Like, same thing as being a doctor. You need to want to do that, want to help people. And I said, well, I want to help people. Like, that's what I want to do. And he's like, you can help people a different way.
Yep.
And meet and touch millions of lives at once versus what you could ever do doing it this other route that you think is the route you're supposed to, because that's what people around you have done, if that makes sense. It's like jump into something that's, different, and you kind of see. So I said, well, fine, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. So he bought me a book the week I said I was going to quit, because he wanted me to quit so bad, because I didn't want to quit.
Wow.
And the book said, you're a badass at making money. That was.
I love her books, by the
yeah.
way. Jensen Sarah.
Yeah.
Yes.
That was the first book that he bought for me. And I
made my brother read the book. Yeah.
That's awesome. So he bought me that book. I remember, green book. It was like screaming money at me. I was like, I'm going to read it. And I quit that week, actually. And when I did, I was just like, so where do you start now?
Scary?
And it was very scary, extremely scary. I didn't even have like a Instagram page, let alone a website for the company I wanted to start. Like, I hadn't quite, it was still up here in my brain. I hadn't quite poured it out yet. I had an idea of what it was going to be, but I didn't quite do it yet. And then, I decided on the name. The name of the company back then was Clit Health, Kliit. Believe it or not, it was like representing the clitoris. The idea was to destigmatize conversations around women's health issues. Because a lot of times the reason why people don't seek care is because they can't talk about what's going on. And that became a really popular thing, and like the basis of like who I became as a startup founder, right? I would go on stages and be like, who here has a vagina? And then make a lot of investors like either excited or uncomfortable, one in between.
You win. After that, you win the competition.
So it was one of the two, but it was really great, and it made a giant statement, which was it needed to. And then I can talk about what the transition was. But in that time, I was, not quite making it as much money. I was doing one or two things here and there. I remember preparing for my first pitch competition that I ever did and won. And in that time, I was like, I need a job. I need $20,000 to give these developers. I need a job. So I actually got a job. I reluctantly went to find a job. This is after I quit. So just to say, like, this is not easy. It's not easy to leave. This was after I quit. I found another job. I reluctantly did that interview, and they called me right back, and I got the job. And I was just like, oh boy, this is
like I was kind of kidding.
Yeah,
guys,
I was kind of kidding, but I took the job, and I started working there for 2 weeks. Exactly 2 weeks, and I got let go.
I was about to say, I remember that part of the story.
Because in the 2 weeks that I worked there, I was traveling for pitch competitions in the 2 weeks. I just couldn't physically stay there.
You were
Right.
so focused on building this
Right.
baby, this vision that you
That
had.
it was just hard. It was very hard to go back there.
Mm.
And then when that happened, I called my husband and I said, well, they fired me today. And he said, well, you shouldn't look for any other job.
Wow.
So that was good. And I remember 2 days after I went to Oakland at Afrotech, and that was the first live competition that I won in front of thousands of people. It was like,
what does that do to your confidence? What does that
you
do
know
to your
what?
idea of your vision?
That, and someone asked me that question. I actually ran into one of the founders of Afrotech Blavity yesterday, and I was telling him what that did. He ended up becoming like a angel investor in Kiira post that. But, it was, what it did was two things, right? When you're nervous and you're scared, and like I said, I just got let go from a job like 2-3 days before. I had barely any money in my bank account, and I traveled to Oakland, and I think I was the youngest company at that pitch competition. I won. I got moved to the finals from the semifinals, so I passed that, and then I won the final. And this was 5,000 people, crowd full of people. It was like, it did something to my spirit that I don't know how to describe. Like, people were standing up, they were clapping, they were going nuts over this company that I called Clit Health, by the way, just to give you perspective. Like, it just showed that if you speak up about what it is that you're building, people will resonate and rally behind you, especially when it has a huge impact, right? And it has the potential of actually changing lives, right? So I remember blanking out on stage because I had practiced 150 times. I can never forget it. My technique for pitching, and for anyone who's interested,
Yes.
was actually, I would write down my entire pitch. I had the storyline down, and I would read it to myself, and then I would record myself reading my pitch, and I would listen to it throughout the day. So what that does, how we learn music easily from like listening to it and it sticks in your brain? What that did for me was, even when I was busy and too busy to like actually practice my pitch, I would play it in my ear.
I'm gonna steal that idea.
Yeah.
Because that is a great tip. I'm stealing that one.
That's how I learned how to do it. So when I went on a stage where you imagine like the lights are blasting and you can't really see anyone in the back except the two front rows.
Wasn't that kind of better though?
Or something like that.
For me, it was better because I every time I speak and I don't see the whole stage,
yeah,
I just speak to the people in the first row.
And
like,
that's
my homie.
So you always tell your people to sit in the front.
Yeah, I just pick somebody in the front. If I see your lip quivering at all, and at some point in this speech, if it got you, that's the person I'm focused on right there.
You keep focusing on that person.
I'm like, man, I got to break him or her. Yep. I got to make them cry. I got to make sure that it really touches them because that's important. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you always find those people in the front row, right? And it was like, so it was like this, sea of people in the back at Afrotech. And then the front row was like, of course, my husband, my co-founder, and a bunch of our friends who road tripped to Afrotech with him to Oakland. So it was a full 2 rows of people, and then some new faces. There were friendly faces, excited faces. But I remember at the end, because I had practiced a 3-minute pitch for the semifinals, and then I didn't practice a longer pitch because they wanted us to do 5 minutes for the finals. So I used the same pitch, but I slowed down in the other pitch. That's also a skill, right? The first one was 3 minutes. I only practiced a 3-minute pitch. For my 5-minute pitch, I practiced like audience participation. So the whole like, who here has a vagina? Who here knows someone who has vagina? Like having those conversations. I mean, you have to pick and choose what the crowd looks like and decide where you want to go with those. But it's always nice to have that participation. It helps with the nerves. That's one thing, because people start laughing and then you're not as, nervous as you were, right? So that's one thing. So, and then I was done with my 3-minute pitch for the 5 minutes, but I slowed down so much and I was like very clear in everything I was saying. And then I was like, maybe like 10 seconds early, and I was done. And the guy was like, "Are you done?" And I was like, yeah, I'm done. So he was like, excellent timing, this and this and that. So I definitely won that one, although there were some really incredible companies there. So because there were such incredible companies I was pitching against, it also gave me like a boost.
Like,
it was like, you belong here.
Yeah, because a lot of times, like, even like I've heard guys, like, for example, I played with some of the best players in the world, and they didn't understand how good they were until they got to like a Team USA, where they were playing with other guys who are the greats, who they've always been watching. Like, these are the great guys of the NBA. And then they play against them. They're like, oh, actually, I can hang with them. Not only am I hanging with them, I'm actually kicking their tail. And so that stuff is just, and then you come back to your team like, no, I'm actually the man. So you come out to the season, and then that confidence runs out with your team as well. So are you then, okay, so tell me about proud moments for you as you have built this company, as you've gone along. I just came to your studio, to the clinic, flagship clinic yesterday that you built in Melrose here in LA. Incredible. It's so beautiful. It's amazing. And everybody in the staff is so welcoming and friendly. You even had me jump into a yoga class. That was awesome. But what are some of your proudest moments as you've been building this company?
So proud moments, I'm going to list them in sequence, right? Yeah. So proudest moment was the first pitch competition that I actually won, and it wasn't cash or anything. It's this incubator program called Grid 110 out in LA here. And that was a moment that I was proud about, because I remember the first time that I went in front of the class. It's like an accelerator class where they teach you about, writing a pitch deck, pitching, business planning, all that stuff. The first time that I went out, because day one, they told us, come and talk about your company. And I was shaking. I was shivering. My hands were trembling. I was so uncomfortable, so nervous. And then my partner at the time, she was the confident one who was just like rocking it. Like, I want to be her, right? But she was still learning. So we're all learning. But then when I did what I just explained, which is like listening, practicing, because I knew I wasn't good at it. So that's the first thing. I knew like I could build up to it, but it didn't come naturally at that time. Okay? And it's kind of learning to practice those things and being more confident. And when I did that pitch on it's called a demo day type thing, where investors and partners kind of come in and listen to you and they kind of like scout companies basically at those events. They're, and I actually went on stage and it was fantastic, and I won flat out. And I remember just being like, wow, a few weeks ago you were trembling. In fact, when I first started talking, I was still shaking a little bit, to be honest. But then when I continued, I was just like, this is your stuff. Like, telling a story that people are resonating with, and it just, you're within where you're supposed to be at that point. So that was my proudest moment. That gave me the confidence to apply for Afrotech, right? And then I applied for Afrotech and I won that competition. And I was like, it's off from here. I was like, sign me up for everything. I went to Harvard and won a competition. I went to CES and won a competition. Like, I just kept going to all these different things. And that's actually how I raised my first capital, right? Because raising funds as a woman of color, like a Black woman in America, is one of the hardest things ever, right? And the big thing for me was, okay, how do you build, because you have to prove a lot of things, right? How do you gain enough funding to go out to raise VC money? So that was the thing for me. Like, that was a proud moment for me. And then the third proud moment for me, post the first one, Afrotech, was when I raised my first $1 million in venture capital. And at the time, it was just a handful of Black women who had ever raised $1 million in venture capital in the entire US. So I remember one of my investors being like, hey, this is your moment. Do you know that it's at the time, less than 50 Black women in the U.S. have raised $1 million.
Hey, did y'all hear that? Wait, say that again so they can hear you. Say it one more time so
At the time.
Yeah, so we've gone up from
grown.
there. Yeah, we've gone up from there. The
the
number
time,
of women has shrunk.
Yes. At the time, at the time, it was less than 50 women in the entire U.S. who were Black who had raised over $1 million at the time. So my investor then was just like, you know what? Like, this is a proud moment. You know, you need to own this. You need to celebrate yourself. And I was just like, yeah, I'm celebrating. Like, this is my celebration. And then we're like off to, keep pushing, keep moving. So I think those have been the proud ones. And then the last one to add to that is the Forbes 30 under 30 proud moment. The reason I say that's a proud moment was typically how it works. And you asked the question in the beginning, right? How it works is you get nominated or you can nominate yourself. My husband was on the list, like I said, and I had talked to him about nominating me. And then he made a comment. He was like, I can't tell your story the way you can. This man, he be pushing me to do all the weird, most random things.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
And he was like, I can't tell your story the way you can. I think you should write it yourself. And I got a little upset at first. I was like, okay, whatever. You're going to make me work. But then I started writing, and they asked a couple questions, which was like, why do you feel like you deserve a spot on this list? And I said, because I've worked extremely hard. I have raised over $1 million, which is something a lot of Black women haven't, right? And also on top of that, I want to be an inspiration to women like me, especially immigrant women who don't even see this as a path that they can even be on, right? And I think that was the main thing, like the part of why else? Like, why do you think you deserve this spot? One, and what would it do for other people? And for me, it was kind of like, I want that Nigerian girl who comes to the airport day one and goes to school to know that one day she can be a successful entrepreneur on a list like this, and she can continue to make change in the world. I think that's a big thing. So that has been my moment. And so I submitted it casually, knowing that I had just like mic dropped on them in that application. And I waited. So you don't know if you got it or not until a couple weeks. I think you might have a feeling that they accepted you if they ask you for more information. So I had a feeling at that point. So I asked him, husband, I was like, oh, they asked me for more information. What does that mean? He was like, you're probably on the list. So I submitted my additional information, which is not always the case, but he was like, there's a sign that you could be. And then you find out that you're on the 30 under 30 list the day it gets announced with everybody else, basically. So I woke up the morning of the announcement, and all my investors had like messaged me.
Wow.
Everyone else had said, did you see this? Did you see this? Did you see that?
That's incredible.
So yeah, it was an incredible feeling to actually do that. So yeah.
So you're on the list with all these other people who are doing incredible stuff,
yes.
right? Just like winning that pitching competition, knowing that there's a whole bunch of other people who are doing amazing things that you beat to get here. What does that do for your confidence now in your idea and your vision as you continue to build?
I think, the confidence piece gets, built with preparation, like I said, right? I became at a place where I had launched a product, I had developed a company, I had raised capital for it, I had done a couple of things at this point. So the list itself was not an additional confidence boost. It was just, what's the word? It was just like a summary of like all the stuff you've done leading to that moment, if that makes sense. Kind of like, okay, you get an additional like tap on your back that you're doing the right thing and you keep pressing forward. You remain humble though, right? Because it's not the end of the road. It's just, because there's a lot of people who are successful who never make it or made it on the list like that, right? That's the truth. But doing that gives you the type of recognition and, kind of call it like an entry into a new category, so to speak, right? And now you're a sought after 30 under 30 entrepreneur in your own right. And it's amazing in that way. And then you build a new community. So there's like, even in LA, there's like a under 30 LA community where we do a bunch of things together. Wow. Right? You make new connections, you do, so it's always so amazing in that way. And it was just, like I said, it was like a confirmation that you're doing the right thing, you're on the right path more than anything else. So
let's go back a little bit now, because
yeah.
this is the part that I love. So
Okay.
moving here from Nigeria.
Okay.
When I moved here, matter of fact, even before that, like, I think part of the thing that keeps me humble
Right.
is the idea of Nigeria. And I've always thought that I have this big vision of being able to go back home to help. Even everything I invest in, the way that I tell stories, like I'm working my way back there.
Right.
So tell me about life in Nigeria. Tell me about some of your fondest memories growing up back home.
Oh my God. So I was born and raised in Nigeria. I have 5 older brothers who actually were born in the U.S. I was the only child. Well, I was the last child and only one who, was not born in America. And from a young age, so the story behind that is my mom was pregnant and she went to Nigeria and she didn't come back.
We did the opposite. My mom was my 2 last siblings. They're the only ones that were born in America.
Really?
Yeah.
So yeah, so that was my story. Can you imagine? And that did a lot for my personality and everything else because and I'll go
I would
towards
love to
that
know the difference
in a
between
little
you and your
bit
brothers.
because our brothers are very different. Yeah,
Wow.
we're very different, but similar in the ways that we are. So when I was born, they actually, mom says like they had this lovely nanny who brought them to Nigeria because she had left them here with her. So that was the first time they actually came to Nigeria after I was born to meet me at the hospital, basically. And then, growing up, being around boys a lot, like my confidence came from that. I always tell people, like, if you're around a lot of boys who you're like struggling to like get like toys and food from food right, it boosts your everything.
Yeah.
Right.
5 older brothers. That's a lot of protection, man.
Protection.
Wow.
There's positives and negatives of the whole thing. I'll tell you that. But yes, they were really protective of me. But my mom always used to remind them to be gentle with me. They were really rough, and they would do things to me that they would do to each other. And she's like, no, she's not like you. Like, stop. Couldn't quite get that, so I was always like gravitating to what they did because I wanted to be a part of them. So I joined karate and like I did a lot of like boys like sports and stuff. Even while I was in like high school, like secondary school in Nigeria, I was in karate. Like I loved that stuff. Like I was always interested in those things because those were the things my brothers were interested in, and somehow I found my way. I had my really feminine side and the things that I would do because of my mom, because she consciously was like, come with me and do this thing, because if not, I wouldn't. But I would say like that really helped with my, just interaction, because now I have a lot of like male friends and yada yada, and I interact with them just the way I kick it with my brothers, basically. And we all did, but my brothers actually went to boarding school in Nigeria before I did. So I would watch them and they would tell these stories, like horror stories about going to boarding school in Nigeria. And I was just like, for some reason, I was looking forward to it. Experiencing my own version. My dad took me to a very different school from the one that they did. So I did go to boarding school. It's kind of like the military. Basically, that's the way I describe it. I've never been to the military, but what I watch and see.
Oh yeah, I know about the boarding schools back home.
Like we wake up like 5 a.m. every day, and everything, and have assembly and wear uniforms and yada yada. So there's all these things, and you also like live in school with your peers, which is interesting because you have a perspective. Like your best friends are the people who you grow up with, and they kind of raise you, if that makes sense, and you spend time at home on the holidays. And I think because of that, our parents wanted to spend additional time with us, right? The holidays, because they didn't quite get to throughout the rest of the year, right? Which is interesting. Like I remember getting able to do like phone calls and stuff once a week with our parents. They would come, I believe it was once a month or something, for like a visiting day on campus, those types of things. Like literally, it's either military or prison. I don't know which one. It's like they would come visit you once a month. They couldn't there was contraband. They couldn't give you certain things. Like it was interesting.
I remember all this. I actually kind of forgot a little bit. So So growing up in Nigeria, right, and
Yeah.
some of these things, they actually instill values in you.
They do.
And so, what are I guess my question is, even when I think about myself and my journey, part of the thing that gave me my toughness, right, in basketball and everything, is just that life growing up, and then like there's a little bit of grit, just understanding, where I come from and the grit that people back home have, right? Like that rubbed off onto me. What are some of the things that you feel like have helped you on your journey as you are creating this company? Because I'm assuming there's been times where you had obstacles and points where you felt like you weren't going to make it with creating Kiira Health.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's a couple of things. Like, as Nigerian kids, African kids in general, like the way you grow up at home, right? It really, like you said, it gives some kind of grit. Um, and not be successful in whatever you choose to do, because at the end of the day, like, your parents instill in you very early that you're competing with yourself, and you're
Man, listen, yo, I gotta say this because everybody, I'm gonna see if she got this down. So I would come back home because
Yes.
I would come back home with my report card,
Yes.
and I would come second in my class.
Uh-huh.
My parents' response was always the same thing about the person who came first.
Yeah,
What was
do
the
they have
response?
2 heads?
Do they have 2 heads? They would always say, "What is wrong? How come they came first in the class and you came second? What is wrong? How did?" And that thing always gave me this thing in my mind, like, why can't I do that? Like, why, even when I came to the United States and I tried to play basketball and they cut me from the team, I was like, yeah, like it might be too late, but like, why can't I do it?
Right.
Like, what makes them so much better than me?
Exactly.
And it was kind of irrational because they had been playing for like 15 years before I started. I was like, no, but I can do it. I'll figure out how to do it. So what? Yeah. So is that the same thing? Is that same confidence?
So yes, I think there's trauma behind that as well. Let me just put that out there.
That's another episode.
But I think it is right? It's like you're competing constantly to be the best, right?
Yeah.
You have to be the best. I remember even in school, in secondary school, we had an honors list. And the honors list was something that they put on the door of your classroom during visiting day. So before your parents give you all that food and goodies that they have for you,
that's torture.
they have to go look at the honors list. And if
you're
your name is not on the honors list, you're in trouble.
Wow,
we had people who were consistently not on the honors list. Like, I remember being on the honors list all the time. But my thing was, if you drop from like 3rd, like you said, or 2nd to like 5th on the honors list, that's a problem.
Yeah, that's a problem.
It's like, what were you doing? Why did you drop? But you're like, I'm still on this list.
I'm still on the list. No, nobody wants to see. I don't want to look all the way down there. No, you're embarrassing the family.
I'm still on this list though. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that was the thing, and then you're always like striving, and you're becoming the best. And I think being in secondary school, boarding school, like, you learn really early on who you want to be and what you want to become. And it kind of dictates the rest of your life. And I say this because, there's the cool kids that they're cool. And I remember folks who used to do like beats and this and like rapping, they became artists now full time, and they're successful in Nigeria. I remember the kids because early on you choose, right? The same thing. The doctor, lawyer, engineer thing, it's from our parents, but like I said, it's influence around. Even though my parents didn't do that, in school they influence you to choose one of those, because you have to choose like the sciences or the arts or or like business. That was it, those 3. And if you're in my school, was A class was the science class, and they had to do like further math and all that. And those were the guys who ended up today becoming doctors. All my friends who went there became either doctors or engineers or XYZ. I was in business class. So I was in B class, and B class was for folks who were interested in like econ and all these different things. And then there's the C class, which was more the arts. Yeah. And a lot of times,
they prime you early.
They prime you early because you have so many subjects that you're learning. So
we were taking like 13 subjects at one time. We were taking
13. Yeah, you would take 16. It was in the beginning in junior high, and then you drop 3 of them, I believe, and take 13 when you're in senior, like SS1 to 3, basically, right? So at that point, if you're taking 13 classes and you've been put in one of these three classes, then you don't really go into college undecided.
You already kind of know what you're
because you already know.
doing.
But
Yeah.
there's pros and cons. The pro was that, going to school, like we all, a lot of us who came from Nigeria didn't quite have to do like college algebra, for example, because we were advanced. We had already done, if you've done further math or Nigerian math, basically, you know the fundamentals of like college algebra. So a lot of us got moved forward to like taking stats and everything in the beginning. Right. The downside of, well, the upside is you just breeze through all your first year classes. Easy peasy, 4.0, done, dean's list, all of you. And all your friends are like, you're on the dean's list, because you're used to this honors list, remember? Yeah. So you can't not be on the dean's list. But the thing is, second year, because you didn't quite learn with your peers how to learn a lot of times, you find a lot of people struggling in their second year because they didn't learn how to learn with the United States system of like getting coaching and office hours with your professors.
That was such a new thing for me.
It's so new, right?
Getting tutors,
getting all those things is so new because now you're applying what it is versus just writing things and getting it done. So the application part became a struggle. But the thing is, because back home that you can't not fail, then you work extremely hard to be the best. Still. Wow. And that translates even in work, even in entrepreneurship, even in anything else. And that's why you see that the Nigerians in every field that you're in are pretty successful when it comes to like the black doctors in the US, for example, and even the entrepreneurs and everyone, even the athletes. Like, it doesn't stop, right? You have to be the best of the best. You have to be on top. You got to be great. And that is something that is just innate in you because of how you grew up, basically. So
I'm so grateful for this conversation, and I have one question for the end of this podcast. If you could talk to your younger self and give her some advice, and this could be Crystal when she's leaving Nigeria and coming to America, what would your advice be?
What would my advice be? Crystal leaving Nigeria, coming to America she was an interesting person. So I'm trying to think about what my advice would be, because let me tell you this fun story. So when I actually came to America, I put on a flight, right, by my parents, by myself, because my brothers were in Houston, which is where I ended up going to college at University of Houston, U of H. And I got on a flight, but they booked my flight that had a full day's layover. Right? So I get to the airport, I'm at Heathrow, and I am 17 years old at the time. And I was like, a day layover. So I went to the immigration office and I said, you guys got to let me out. I need to go into town. And they said no, because I didn't have a visa. And I said, no, you're letting me out. They called my parents. I was there for 3 hours. And then, do you know what happened? They actually stamped my passport on the spot that day. Yes, I still have it. I still have that same exact passport.
Y'all.
Yeah. Wow. I still have it. And they were like, you're a minor, you need an escort. And so they gave me someone at the airport to take me to my hotel. I remember spending a ton of money at the airport's hotel, but I was just like, I can't sleep here. Like, you guys just have to figure it out, right? And it was that thing, the confidence I already had from going to boarding school and everything else kind of like followed me, because I'm like, you can speak up for yourself, because you learn how to really speak up for yourself, right? And I talked to them, and then that happened. But I'd say, like, at that point, like, post that was my proud 17-year-old self. But I was very scared when I finally, that is surface stuff, right? I was scared when I finally got into school and was about to launch into this new life, even though I had been with my brothers. And mind you, like, they're older, so we didn't quite grow up together at this point. So I was really nervous about just everything, right? And so anxious about growing up, right? And I think that's what I would say to myself, not to be so anxious and just take things day by day, because that's something I didn't know how to do. I would, like, in college, I was planning for like 20 years down the line, really. Like I said, I was an international student, but as an international student, to get like my green card and everything, and I was struggling for that. But knowing that my brothers were American citizens and they were all over 18 years old, I was like, all right, guys, bring me your passports. You guys are gonna file for me. This is me planning my first year, what I was gonna do at the end of school. And I actually filed for my parents because an attorney told me that was the fastest way for me to gain my green card and permanent residency, and pay less tuition to like help my parents out. So I filed for my parents using my brother's information, and they got it. And then the week they came to America, they filed for me, and I became a resident. So always planning, always like thinking, always trying. And now that I'm at this stage in my life, those things were great for me. They helped me to be where I am today, even starting a company and everything else. I needed to be a resident or a citizen to do all the stuff that I've done so far, right? So I think that was helpful, but also like I dealt with a lot of anxiety and like stress as a young person. Like the adulting stress, I started that stress early, right? And then you grow up and you're like, wow, you should have spent time really enjoying your life, because now you're like knee deep in this adulting thing and you still have to figure it out, versus all the years back then they should have spent being a young person, right? I didn't spend a lot of time being the average young person because I didn't feel like I had the choice, but truly I did, right? I just chose not to. I chose the other side because of anxiety and just fear of not knowing, and I always wanted to know. So I'll just tell my young self to just chill out, right? Relax. Like everything will work out the way it's supposed to. Of course you work hard, but know how to relax and not take yourself too seriously.
Beautiful. Yo, thank you so much for this conversation. This was amazing. Hopefully somebody can hear this and be inspired as they're on their journey to creating their own company. Crystal Adesanya, the founder of Kiira Health.
Yes.
Wow. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh my God. Hey, Festus here. I hope you liked that episode. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and here's some more episodes that you might like. On this side.